I spent nearly €3,500 trying to get my driving license in Germany, and I still do not have a license. I dreadfully underestimated how difficult this process would be. So how did this happen? I'm going to tell you. Well, I'm sitting in my dad's car.
Broom, broom.
Nummer eins. Learning to drive in Germany was way harder than I expected. Okay, so in Germany, this is the basic sort of setup. So, firstly, you register with a driving school, then you do 21 hours of theory classes in person, which is so boring, and I really don't think I learned anything useful. And then you have to do your Sonderfahrten, which are essentially like mandatory driving hours, which include driving on the Autobahn, driving on country roads, driving at night. All of these I agree with on like a practical basis. It's good for learner drivers to be exposed to all of these different environments, but they cost a fortune, and they're only valid for 2 years before you have to repeat them. And the entire thing is just expensive. Like, I think at the moment it's sitting between sort of 2,500 to 4,000 euros for a driving license. And that lower end will obviously be if you have driving experience already and you don't have to book a lot of lessons. At the moment, I've spent probably around 3,000 to 3,500 euros. Like many businesses in Berlin, my driving school was cash only. So that was really convenient. Every time you go to the driving school, you got to go to the ATM. And this honestly led to my general conclusion that driving schools, similar to apothekers, somehow a packet of painkillers costs €6. I believe that driving schools are on that similar wavelength of like day-to-day pedestrian level scam. So I had some, I would say, cultural differences with my driving instructor in that he was mean, and I don't want him to be mean. I'm not saying this applies to all German driving instructors, but I will say that my driving instructor in Germany compared with my driving instructor in the UK was markedly different. Here's an impression of my driving instructor in the UK. You're doing so well, Claire, really, really well. We're just gonna pull up here, do a little bit of practice, and you'll be absolutely fine, don't you worry. Here's my impression of my driving instructor in Germany. Bremse, Claire, hast du alles vergessen? Which did lead to some clashes between the two of us. We had an argument about how I think he should be nicer and give me his positive feedback, so I actually developed my self-confidence as a driver, and he said, if I don't say anything, it means it's fine. I know it's an easy and it's a lazy stereotype to categorize Germans as unpolite and like rude in some senses, and it's also not true. But sometimes you do meet the occasional officious sort of angry German, and yes, there are more of them than in the UK, because I think the UK people are just as angry inside. We're just a bit more repressed and quiet about it. Germans are just unashamedly raging when they want to be. Take that as you will. Okay, and now we arrive at probably the biggest of the problems. Before the practical test, of course, we must do the theory test. And I will say I, at first, underestimated this too. So in the UK theory test, I don't think it's too hard. You do like a series of questions and then do a hazard perception test, which is basically where you push a button when you see a hazard. For example, like a fox or a child between the cars or a music producer from Berlin. But this theory test was no joke. It was no joke. I think I revised probably about 9 hours a day. I was on my little walking pad, just walking on my phone, learning this. Plus like the theory lessons that I did. The German theory test is 1,500 questions long. And apparently, and this is the way that everyone just says it, in this kind of like begrudgingly sad, accepting way of the reality, is that the only way you can pass it is by memorizing every single one of those questions. How can you have a theory test that tests simply just memory instead of tests logic and principles of the road, you know? It turns out that you can, and it's exactly what it does, because despite spending days, hours of my life on revising for this, I failed by 2 questions. I had a question about parking on work days, and it said which days can you park. So if you can't park on a work day, you can park on Saturday, Sunday and public holidays. And I didn't realise Saturday is a public holiday in Germany. I would say that's less a question about driving aptitude and more a question of cultural knowledge. It's extremely difficult to remember 1,500 questions, especially when you have like a full-time job. But I tried. I went back and I spent more time revising for the theory test, the second round. And I went and I failed again. This time because I didn't know. Saw some of the formulas and the calculations required from me for this theory test. I was like, I would say at least I prepared for some exams at Cambridge University less than I did for this theory exam. And I failed it twice. Still haven't passed it. Apparently the fail rate of the theory test is 50%, which is kind of insane. I would like to have comparative data from other countries. If anyone has any, please leave it. Actually, when I was in there, there was a guy who was on his 9th attempt at this theory exam. And I was just like, this exam doesn't test like actual applied knowledge or principles. It just is a memory game. And it's absurd that this is how they assess theoretical driving aptitude. You know, and some of these questions, you get a question, it's like it's a generic sort of junction, four-road junction. Who gets to go first? You know, you think, oh, I'll apply the general principles of the road, the general principles of right of way. That should appease the overlords of the theory exam. No. They're not looking for that sort of logic application, because in that question, I bet you money that they will stick in some random thing that will just throw you off. Some random thing that will just throw you off and make that question now not about logic, but just about how much you've looked or remembered that exact question. For example, they'll put like a no entry sign in one of the things, or a random like police officer in the middle of it, or a scooter in the middle of it, or like a lime scooter with a child with 2 children on the back. I don't know. It's just there to f you up, for sure. And I cannot respect a system that tests like this. So I failed the theory test for the second time, and it then meant that I couldn't do my practical test. And that in turn meant that I have to repeat some of my mandatory driving hours because the 2-year validity period of those driving hours had now expired. Now this is a bit my fault. I didn't know that the mandatory driving hours had a 2-year validity period. When I started driving, I was doing it in a kind of like, okay, when I've got time, when I've got money, and I traveled a bit and went out of the country for work for a little bit. And as you can see, everything put together means that I essentially am back to square one, which leaves me probably another at least €1,500 away from getting my driving license. And yeah, I think if I stay with the same teacher, I will never ever get my driving license. So I've ended up essentially throwing in the towel and just saying like, there's something sort of comforting front of a Vespa driving around the Italian countryside. Sure, I would love that. However, the German government did release plans on their intentions to make the driving license a little cheaper and a little easier to get. Because even though you might watch this video and think, oh my God, Claire, you just have none of the stones, none of the gall required to pass the German driving license test, I will have you know that the German government actually agrees with me that it is very difficult and expensive, too difficult and expensive to get a driving license at the moment. And I guess by extension that the driving schools have essentially become some kind of unregulated racketeering scheme. I think this is great news. If it actually comes through, it's great news. Maybe for the people learning to drive now, not for people like me who have spent already $3,500 and don't have a driving license. But if you're starting to learn to drive in 2025 or 2026, when the regulations change, good on you. If you're like me and you're stuck in this weird purgatory of being certainly able to drive, but institutionally limited, I would say perhaps wait till the regulations change. I now plan, hopefully, to get my license here in the UK. I don't even care about driving in Berlin. I don't care about moving furniture. I'm just done. I just want to have a little life, a small little life with a small occasional little Vespa. And I'm fine. I'm fine. Yes, thank you for watching. Give me a subscribe and come back. Goodbye.